After I lost my job, my daughter threw me out in the dead of winter. If you won't work, you can't live here. To keep from freezing, I slept in a shelter that ran medical tests. The doctor cried when she examined me. Your antibodies are unique. They're the only thing that can wake a billionaire from a coma. His family is offering a fortune. When I saw the check, I fainted. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The pink slip came on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered with the same casual indifference as the morning coffee. 23 years at Henderson & Associates, and Mr. Peterson couldn't even look me in the eye when he handed me that envelope. Budget cuts, Maxine, you understand. I understood all right. At 63, I was expensive insurance and outdated skills wrapped in a body that reminded everyone how long I'd been there. The younger girls with their computer wizardry and social media savvy had been circling my desk like vultures for months. I cleaned out my desk in silence, packing 23 years of my life into a cardboard box. The small cactus Amaya had given me for my birthday 3 years ago went in first, then the photo of her graduation, and finally the coffee mug that read, World's Best Mom, a title I was apparently about to lose along with everything else. The drive to Amaya's house felt longer than usual. Each red light gave me more time to practice what I'd say. How do you tell your only child that you've lost the job that's been your identity for over 2 decades? How do you admit that at 63, starting over feels impossible? Her house sat perfectly manicured in the suburbs, a testament to her husband Derek's success in real estate. The mortgage was hefty, I knew, because she'd complained about it often enough when asking for my help with groceries or the electric bill. I'd always helped, of course. That's what mothers do. I found Amaya in her pristine kitchen, meal prepping for the week ahead. She looked up from her containers with that expression she'd perfected in her teenage years, the one that said I was interrupting something important. Mom, what are you doing here? It's not Sunday. I need to talk to you, sweetheart. I set my purse down on her granite countertop, noting how she immediately moved it to a chair, away from her clean workspace. I lost my job today. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Amaya's hands stilled over her meal containers, and for a moment, I thought I saw concern flash across her face. Then it hardened into something else entirely. What do you mean you lost your job? Budget cuts. After 23 years, they just let me go. She resumed her packing, more aggressively now. Well, what are you going to do about it? The question caught me off guard. Not, are you okay? Or, I'm sorry, Mom. Just a demand for my action plan, as if losing a job at my age was as simple as misplacing car keys. I'll look for something else, of course. It might take some time, though. Companies aren't exactly lining up to hire women my age. Amaya slammed a container down harder than necessary. Mom, you can't expect to just live here indefinitely while you figure things out. The words hit me like ice water. Live here? I hadn't even asked to live here. I'd simply come to tell her what happened, maybe hoping for a little comfort from my daughter. I wasn't asking to move in, Amaya. I was just telling you. Good, because Derek and I have been talking, and we think it's time for some tough love. She turned to face me fully, and her expression was cold, calculated. You've been coasting for years, Mom, taking the easy job, never pushing yourself. Maybe this is the wake-up call you need. Coasting. The word stung more than it should have. I thought of all those extra hours I'd worked to help pay for her college, the vacations I'd skipped to help with her wedding costs, the retirement money I'd dipped into when Derek's business had a slow year. You're 35 years old, Amaya. I raised you by myself after your father left. I worked 2 jobs most of your childhood to keep us afloat. I've never coasted a day in my life. She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes at me. That's different. I was a kid then. Now you're just comfortable, settling for mediocrity. Derek chose that moment to walk in, still in his expensive suit from whatever showing he'd just finished. He kissed Amaya's cheek and nodded at me with polite disinterest. Tell him, Derek. Tell Mom what we discussed. Derek loosened his tie, clearly uncomfortable with being dragged into this conversation. Maybe this isn't the right time. No, it's perfect timing. Amaya's voice had taken on that shrill edge it got when she was building up to something big. Mom, we've been watching you for years. No ambition, no drive. You go to that same boring job, come home to that same tiny apartment, watch the same TV shows. It's like you've given up on life. Each word was a small knife, precisely aimed. I stood there absorbing the assault, wondering when my daughter had developed such skill at cruelty. And now, she continued, instead of seeing this as an opportunity to finally do something meaningful with your life, you're already making excuses about age discrimination and how hard it's going to be. Because it is hard, Amaya. Do you have any idea what it's like to be my age and suddenly unemployed? No, I don't, because I've never let myself get comfortable enough to be in that position. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek shifted uncomfortably, studying his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. When had she become so hard, so lacking in empathy? I should go, I said quietly, reaching for my purse. Mom, wait. For a moment, I thought she was going to apologize, to take back the cruelty. Instead, she delivered the final blow. We think you should probably find somewhere else to spend Christmas this year. We're hosting Derek's family, and honestly, it would just be awkward having you there unemployed and bitter. Bitter, that's what she thought I was. I drove home through the gathering dusk, her words echoing in my head. Comfortable, mediocre, bitter. Is that really how she saw me? The mother who had sacrificed everything to give her a better life than I'd had? My apartment felt smaller than usual when I walked in. The heating bill notice on my kitchen counter seemed to mock me. One more thing I couldn't pay now. I had maybe 3 months of savings, enough to cover rent and basic expenses if I was careful. After that, I made a cup of tea and sat in my worn armchair, staring at the dark window. Snow had started to fall, tiny flakes dancing in the streetlight's glow. Winter was coming early this year, and for the first time in my life, I had nowhere to go when the cold set in. My phone rang, and for a foolish moment I hoped it was Amaya calling to apologize. Instead, it was an automated message about my car insurance renewal. Even the machines were demanding money I no longer had. As I sat there watching the snow accumulate on my windowsill, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That the woman who had raised her daughter to believe family meant everything was about to learn just how little that meant when times got tough. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling my old windows. Winter was definitely coming, and I was about to face it more alone than I'd ever imagined possible. 3 weeks later, I stood outside the Riverside Community Shelter with everything I owned in 2 garbage bags and a battered suitcase. The December wind cut through my thin coat like it was made of paper, and my breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. The job interviews had been a series of polite rejections. We'll be in touch. We've decided to go with someone with more current experience. We're looking for someone who can grow with the company. Each one was another way of saying I was too old, too outdated, too much of a risk. My savings had evaporated faster than I'd calculated. The heating bill, groceries, gas for job interviews, the pharmacy co-pays for my blood pressure medication. It all added up to a number that exceeded my unemployment benefits by hundreds of dollars each month. When I couldn't make December's rent, my landlord had been surprisingly patient. Mrs. Chen had known me for 8 years, had seen me leave for work every morning and return every evening like clockwork. She'd given me an extra 2 weeks, but even her kindness had limits. "I'm sorry, Maxine," she'd said when she handed me the eviction notice. "I wish I could help more, but I have my own bills to pay." I'd called Amaya exactly once since that awful conversation in her kitchen. The phone had rung 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Amaya and Derek. We can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and we'll get back to you." I'd hung up without saying a word. The shelter's entrance was a heavy glass door marked with cheerful signs about hope and community support. Inside, the air was warm but thick with the smell of industrial disinfectant, and too many people in too small a space. A woman behind a metal desk looked up from her paperwork with tired but kind eyes. "First time here, honey?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I'm Susan. What's your name?" Maxine Thornfield. She handed me a clipboard thick with forms. Fill these out and we'll get you set up. Dinner's at 6, lights out at 10. You'll need to be out by 7 in the morning and can't come back until 4 in the afternoon. Out? Where am I supposed to go during the day? Susan's expression softened. Library's warm. Some folks walk the malls. There's a day center on 5th Street, but it fills up fast. I took the clipboard to a folding chair in the corner and began filling out form after form. Name, address. I wrote none and felt a piece of my dignity die. Employment status. Another none. Emergency contact. I stared at that line for a long time before writing none again. The dining hall was a study in quiet desperation. About 40 people sat at long tables, eating from paper plates and speaking in hushed tones. I recognized the look in their eyes, the same combination of gratitude and shame I was learning to carry myself. I sat next to a woman who introduced herself as Rosa. She was probably my age, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and clothes that had seen better days but were clean and carefully maintained. "How long have you been here?" I asked, grateful for someone to talk to. 6 months, Rosa replied, stirring her soup slowly. Lost my apartment when my daughter moved her boyfriend in and decided I was cramping their style. The similarity to my own situation made my chest tight. Your daughter? Same as yours, I'd guess from that look on your face. These young ones, they think family obligation only flows one way. From us to them. She took a careful sip of soup. What about you? What brought you here? I told her about the job loss, about Amaya's reaction, about sitting in my cold apartment watching my savings disappear. Rosa listened without judgment, occasionally nodding as if she'd heard variations of this story before. The hardest part, she said when I finished, isn't the cold or the bad food or sleeping on a cot in a room with 20 other women. It's realizing that the people you die for wouldn't cross the street to help you. That night, lying on a narrow cot between Rosa and a young woman who cried quietly into her pillow, I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how I'd gotten here. 6 months ago, I was Maxine Thornfield, administrative assistant and devoted mother. Now, I was just another homeless woman grateful for a warm place to sleep. The next morning, I spent 8 hours in the public library, reading newspapers and applying for jobs online. By afternoon, my feet hurt from walking around in shoes that needed to be replaced, but would have to last until I could afford new ones. When I returned to the shelter, there was a sign posted by the entrance. Research study volunteers needed. Compensation provided. Susan noticed me reading it. Some medical research group comes by every few weeks. They pay $20 for blood draws, do some basic health screenings. Easy money if you need it. $20 was more than I'd had in my pocket in weeks. I signed up immediately. The next day, a small team of medical professionals set up in the shelter's community room. Dr. Martinez, a young woman with kind eyes and efficient movements, called my name from her list. Just a routine screening, Mrs. Thornfield. We're studying immune responses in different populations. She took my blood pressure, checked my temperature, and asked about my medical history. When she drew my blood, she labeled the vials carefully and made notes on her clipboard. Any unusual illnesses in your family? Autoimmune conditions? Genetic disorders? No, nothing like that. We've always been healthy. She nodded and handed me my $20 in cash. It felt like a fortune. But as I walked away, I noticed her assistant was staring at my file with an odd expression. When they thought I wasn't looking, I saw them make several phone calls, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. 3 days later, they returned. This time, Dr. Martinez seemed different, more intense, more focused. Mrs. Thornfield, we'd like to run some additional tests if you're willing. More compensation, of course. What kind of tests? Just some follow-up blood work. Your initial screening showed some interesting markers. I didn't know what that meant, but $50 was $50. I agreed immediately. This time they took more blood, several vials, and asked me to wait while they ran some preliminary tests. I sat in the shelter's lobby, watching other residents come and go, wondering what interesting markers meant. When Dr. Martinez returned, Her expression was carefully controlled, but I could see excitement flickering behind her professional demeanor. "Mrs. Thornfield, I need to ask you to keep this conversation confidential for now, but we'd like to schedule some additional appointments with you. More comprehensive testing." "Is something wrong with me?" "No, not wrong. Quite the opposite, actually." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You may have something very special, Mrs. Thornfield, something that could help a lot of people. I left that meeting with $200 in cash and more questions than answers." That night, lying on my cot, I replayed the conversation over and over. Something special. Something that could help people. For the first time since I'd lost my job, I felt a tiny spark of hope. I didn't know what they'd found in my blood, but for the first time in months, someone was treating me like I mattered. Outside, the December wind howled against the shelter windows, but I barely noticed. Whatever they'd discovered in my blood, it was enough to make doctors pay attention. It was enough to make me feel, for the first time in a very long time, that maybe I wasn't as worthless as my own daughter believed. The third appointment wasn't at the shelter. Dr. Martinez had given me an address across town, a gleaming medical complex that looked nothing like the community health centers I was used to. I stood outside the Preston Medical Research Institute feeling completely out of place in my secondhand coat and worn shoes. The lobby was all marble and glass, with expensive artwork on the walls and a receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. I approached her desk hesitantly, clutching the appointment card Dr. Martinez had given me. "I'm here to see Dr. Martinez, Maxine Thornfield." She typed something into her computer, and her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course, Mrs. Thornfield. Please have a seat. Someone will be right with you." The waiting room was filled with leather chairs and coffee table books about medical breakthroughs. I felt like an imposter sitting there, acutely aware that my presence probably lowered the property value of the entire building. "Mrs. Thornfield?" I looked up to see Dr. Martinez, but she wasn't alone. A tall, elegant woman in an expensive suit stood beside her, along with two other doctors I didn't recognize. "Would you come with us, please?" They led me down a hallway lined with offices and into a conference room with a massive table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. This definitely wasn't a routine blood draw. Dr. Martinez introduced the other woman as Dr. Carmen Reyes, the director of the institute. Dr. Reyes had the kind of presence that commanded attention. Sharp eyes, perfect posture, and an aura of authority that made me feel even smaller than I already did. "Mrs. Thornfield," Dr. Reyes began, settling into a chair across from me. "Dr. Martinez has shared the results of your blood work with our team, and I have to say, we're quite amazed." "Amazed by what, exactly?" Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "Your blood contains a very specific type of antibody that we've only seen in 12 people worldwide. Ever. 12 people. In the entire world." I stared at them, trying to process what that meant. "I don't understand. What kind of antibody?" Dr. Reyes pulled out a thick folder and opened it to reveal pages of charts and graphs that might as well have been written in a foreign language. "It's related to a rare genetic variant, a mutation, if you will, that affects how your immune system produces certain proteins." "A mutation? That sounds bad." "On the contrary," Dr. Martinez said quickly, "it's incredibly valuable. This particular antibody has shown remarkable promise in treating certain neurological conditions that have been considered untreatable until now." I felt a strange disconnect, like they were talking about someone else's blood, someone else's life. "Neurological conditions?" "Brain injuries specifically," Dr. Reyes explained. "Traumatic brain injuries that result in prolonged comas. We've been researching this for years, but we've never had access to enough of these antibodies to conduct meaningful trials." The room fell silent for a moment. I could hear the hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. "Mrs. Thornfield," Dr. Martinez said gently, "we'd like to discuss the possibility of a more extensive partnership with you." Partnership. That was a word I hadn't heard applied to myself in a very long time. "What kind of partnership?" Dr. Reyes exchanged a glance with her colleagues before continuing. There's a patient, a young man who's been in a coma for 6 months following a severe car accident. Traditional treatments have been ineffective, but our research suggests that your antibodies could potentially stimulate the neural pathways necessary for recovery. I thought about that for a moment. A young man, someone's son, lying unconscious in a hospital bed while his family waited and prayed for a miracle. You think my blood could help him wake up? We believe it's possible, yes. But we'd need to conduct more tests first, establish the proper protocols, ensure safety measures are in place. Dr. Martinez pulled out another folder, this one filled with legal documents. If you're interested, we'd want to enter into a formal agreement. You'd be compensated, of course, for your time and participation. Compensated. I almost laughed. 3 months ago, I was worried about being able to afford Christmas gifts for Amaya. Now doctors in expensive suits were talking about compensating me for something I didn't even know I had. How much compensation are we talking about? Dr. Reyes hesitated, and I saw something flicker across her face, an emotion I couldn't quite identify. The family of the patient is, well, they're prepared to be very generous. This young man is their only son. How generous? Another pause, another exchange of glances. Mrs. Thornfield, Dr. Martinez said carefully, before we discuss specific numbers, I want you to understand something. What you have, these antibodies, they can't be synthesized. They can't be created artificially. You're one of only 12 people on Earth who produce them naturally. 12 people. 1 of 12. I tried to wrap my mind around that concept. The initial treatment protocol would require regular blood draws over several months, Dr. Reyes continued. It's a significant commitment, and frankly, without your participation, this young man will likely never wake up. The weight of that statement settled over me like a heavy blanket. Someone's son, lying in a hospital bed, and I might be the only person who could help him. Mrs. Thornfield, Dr. Martinez said, leaning forward with tears actually forming in her eyes. I've been practicing medicine for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Your antibodies aren't just rare, they're miraculous. Miraculous. Me, Maxine Thornfield, the woman sleeping in a homeless shelter, the mother whose own daughter had called her bitter and mediocre. I was miraculous. The family has authorized us to offer $5 million for your participation in the treatment protocol. The number hit me like a physical blow. $5 million. I felt the blood drain from my face, and the room started to spin slightly. 5 million? With the understanding that this is just the beginning, Dr. Reyes added quickly. If the treatment is successful, and we believe it will be, there will be additional compensation. Much more substantial compensation. I stared at them, these important doctors in their expensive clothes, talking about numbers that seemed impossible. $5 million just to start. Mrs. Thornfield, are you all right? Dr. Martinez reached across the table, concern evident in her voice. I need a moment, I managed to say. This is a lot to process. They gave me a glass of water and some time to collect myself. As I sat there in that luxurious conference room, I thought about the shelter, about Rosa and the other women who would be grateful for $20. I thought about my daughter, who'd dismissed me as worthless and bitter. Most of all, I thought about the young man lying in a coma somewhere, and his family waiting for a miracle that might be flowing through my veins. When would we start? I asked finally. Dr. Reyes smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. As soon as you're ready, Mrs. Thornfield. As soon as you're ready. That night, back at the shelter, I lay on my cot staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. In my pocket was a business card with Dr. Reyes's direct number and instructions to call when I'd made my decision. $5 million. Possibly much more. For blood that had been flowing through my veins my entire life without me knowing it had any value at all. Rosa was already asleep in the cot next to me, snoring softly. Tomorrow she'd wake up and spend another day walking around the city, looking for work that probably wouldn't come, hoping for kindness from people who mostly looked right through her. I pulled out my phone, the same cheap prepaid phone I'd bought when I couldn't afford my regular plan anymore, and stared at Amaya's number. Part of me wanted to call her, to share this impossible news, to hear her voice admit she'd been wrong about me. But another part of me, a part that was growing stronger, wondered if she deserved to know. If the daughter who'd thrown me out in the cold, who'd called me comfortable and bitter, deserved to share in this miracle. Outside, the December wind rattled the shelter windows, but for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the cold. Whatever happened next, whatever I decided to do, I was no longer the worthless woman my daughter believed me to be. I was one of 12 people in the world who carried something miraculous in my blood, and tomorrow, I was going to change someone's life. I called Dr. Reyes the next morning from the payphone outside the shelter. My hands shook as I dialed the number, and I had to start over twice because I kept messing up the digits. "Mrs. Thornfield, I was hoping to hear from you today," Dr. Reyes said when her assistant transferred the call. "Have you had a chance to think about our offer?" "I have some questions first." "Of course. Would you prefer to discuss this in person?" An hour later, I was back in that gleaming conference room, but this time I felt different. Less like an imposter, more like someone who belonged there. Dr. Martinez was there again, along with a lawyer whose presence made everything feel more serious and more real. "Before we proceed," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "I want to know more about this young man, the one in the coma." Dr. Reyes nodded approvingly. "His name is Marcus Wellington. He's 26 years old, graduated from Harvard Business School last year. He was driving home from his engagement party when a drunk driver ran a red light. The details made it real in a way the medical terminology hadn't. Someone's son, someone's fiancé, with a whole life ahead of him that had been stolen in an instant. His family owns Wellington Industries," Dr. Martinez added. "They've been searching for any possible treatment option for 6 months now." Wellington Industries. Even I knew that name. They owned half the office buildings downtown and had their fingers in everything from real estate to technology, the kind of family that could throw around millions of dollars like pocket change. "Mrs. Thornfield," the lawyer interjected, "before we discuss the specific terms, I want to make sure you understand the magnitude of what we're proposing. This isn't just a one-time blood draw. The treatment protocol would require regular sessions over several months, possibly longer. How regular? Twice a week initially, then once a week as the treatment progresses. Each session would take approximately 3 hours. I did the math in my head. Months of regular appointments, of having my blood drawn and processed and turned into something that might save a life. And if it doesn't work, Dr. Reyes leaned forward. You'd still receive the full compensation we've discussed. This is payment for your participation, not a performance guarantee. The lawyer slid a thick contract across the table. The initial compensation we discussed yesterday, $5 million. That would be paid upon your agreement to participate. If the treatment is successful and Mr. Wellington makes a full recovery, there would be additional compensation. How much additional compensation? Another one of those meaningful looks passed between them. Dr. Martinez cleared her throat. "Mrs. Thornfield, the Wellington family has authorized us to offer up to $50 million total if their son makes a complete recovery." The number hit me even harder than the first one had. $50 million. I felt myself sway in my chair and gripped the table for support. $50 million? Plus the initial $5 million, the lawyer clarified, for a total of $55 million. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. $55 million was more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. It was enough to buy anything I wanted, go anywhere I dreamed of, never worry about money again. It was also more money than Amaya and her precious Derek would see in their entire lives. "Mrs. Thornfield?" Dr. Martinez's voice sounded like it was coming from far away. "Do you need a moment?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. They left me alone with a glass of water and my racing thoughts. $55 million. Sitting in that conference room, I thought about the eviction notice, about choosing between my blood pressure medication and groceries, about my daughter's cold dismissal of my worth. All of that seemed like it had happened to someone else, in another lifetime. When they returned, I had made my decision. "I want to help him," I said. "When do we start?" The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and medical consultations. I signed forms I barely understood, authorized the lawyers to set up bank accounts I'd never dreamed of having, and underwent the most comprehensive medical examination of my life. "We need to make sure you're healthy enough for the treatment protocol," Dr. Martinez explained as they drew what felt like gallons of blood for testing. "This is going to be intensive." By late afternoon, I walked out of the Preston Medical Research Institute with a contract guaranteeing me more money than I'd ever thought possible, and an appointment to begin treatment the following Monday. But first, I had something I needed to do. I took the bus to Amaya's neighborhood, the same route I'd taken 3 weeks ago when I'd come to tell her about losing my job. The houses looked the same, perfectly maintained and smugly prosperous, but I felt like a different person walking among them. Amaya's car was in the driveway, along with Derek's BMW. Through the front window, I could see her moving around in the kitchen, probably preparing another one of her elaborate meals. I rang the doorbell and waited. When she opened the door, her expression went through several changes: surprise, irritation, and finally a kind of cold resignation. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to tell you something." She sighed heavily, like my presence was an enormous inconvenience. "Derek and I are about to have dinner. Can this wait?" "No, it can't." Something in my tone must have gotten her attention because she stepped back and let me in. Derek was setting the table with their good china, the set I'd helped them buy for their wedding. "Maxine," he said with forced politeness. "How are things going?" "Better than expected, actually. Much better." Amaya crossed her arms. "Did you find a job?" "You could say that." I sat down on their expensive couch without being invited. "I found out I have something very valuable. Something people are willing to pay a lot of money for." Amaya exchanged a look with Derek. I could see them both thinking the same thing, that I'd fallen for some kind of scam, that desperate old women were easy targets for predators. "Mom, please tell me you didn't fall for one of those work-from-home schemes." I almost laughed. "No, sweetie, this is real. Medical research. It turns out my blood contains something extremely rare, something that can help people who are critically ill." "Your blood?" "Antibodies. Very special ones. There are only 12 people in the world who have them." Derek sat down heavily in his chair. "Mom, that sounds like..." "Like what, Derek? Like something too good to be true?" "I thought so too, until they offered me $55 million for my participation in a treatment program." The silence that followed was deafening. Amaya's mouth actually fell open, and Derek's face went completely white. "$55 million?" Amaya whispered. "Million, with an M." I pulled out the contract folder and set it on their coffee table. "I signed the papers this afternoon. The first payment of $5 million will be in my account by the end of the week." Amaya sank into a chair across from me, staring at the legal documents like they might bite her. "This is real? This is actually real?" "Very real. I start treatment on Monday. There's a young man in a coma, and my blood might be the only thing that can save him." Derek leaned forward, his expression shifting from shock to something that looked almost predatory. "Maxine, this is incredible. Think of what we could do with money like that. We could pay off the mortgage, maybe buy that vacation home we've been looking at." "We?" I interrupted. The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Derek's face reddened as he realized what he'd just said. "I mean, this is wonderful news for the family," he backtracked. "For you, of course." I looked at my daughter, who was still staring at the contract with a mixture of disbelief and naked greed. This was the moment I'd been waiting for without realizing it. The moment when she would show me who she really was. "Mom," she said slowly, "I know we had some harsh words a few weeks ago, but you have to understand." "What do I have to understand, Amaya? We were just trying to motivate you, to help you reach your potential." Her voice was taking on that wheedling tone she'd perfected as a teenager when she wanted something. "We never meant for you to end up in that awful place. That awful place. The shelter where I'd met Rosa and learned what real kindness looked like from people who had nothing to give. You threw me out in the middle of winter because you said I had no ambition. Because I was comfortable and mediocre and bitter. Mom, please. We were wrong, okay? We can see that now. I stood up, collecting my contract folder. You were wrong about a lot of things, Amaya, but you were right about one. What's that? I looked around their perfect living room, with its perfect furniture and perfect family photos that would never include me again. You were right that I needed a wake-up call. Just not the kind you thought. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. Behind me, I could hear Amaya's sharp intake of breath, the scrape of Derek's chair as he stood up. Mom, wait. Where are you going? I turned back to face them both. Somewhere I'm wanted. Somewhere I matter. Somewhere people understand my worth. And with that, I walked out of their perfect house and into my new life, leaving them to contemplate the fortune they'd thrown away when they threw me away. The bus ride back to the shelter felt like a victory lap. Tomorrow, I would start treatment to save a young man's life. Next week, I would be a millionaire. But tonight, I was still Maxine Thornfield, and for the first time in months, that felt like enough. The first $5 million arrived in my new account on a Friday morning in January. I knew because Dr. Reyes called me personally to confirm the transfer. Mrs. Thornfield, everything has gone through successfully. Your first treatment session with Marcus is scheduled for Monday morning at 9. I was sitting in the shelter's common room, surrounded by the usual morning chaos of people preparing to leave for another day of wandering the city. Rosa was beside me, carefully folding her few belongings into a canvas bag. Thank you, I said into the phone, aware that everyone around me was probably wondering who would call someone at a homeless shelter about anything important. After I hung up, Rosa looked at me with curious eyes. Good news? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. $5 million. It was sitting in an account with my name on it, earning more interest in a day than I used to make in a month. I'm going to be moving out soon, I told her. Found a place? Something like that. That afternoon, I took a taxi to a real estate office in the better part of town. The receptionist looked surprised when I walked in wearing my shelter clothes, but I'd learned not to care about those looks anymore. I'd like to speak to someone about buying a house, I said. The woman behind the desk hesitated, clearly sizing up my appearance against the likelihood that I could afford anything they had for sale. Perhaps you'd be interested in our rental listings. No, I want to buy. Cash. That got her attention. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Margaret Hartwell, a well-dressed woman in her 50s who specialized in luxury properties. What's your budget, Mrs. Thornfield? $2 million, maybe 2.5 if it's the right place. Aunt Margaret's eyebrows rose, but she was professional enough to hide her surprise quickly. Excellent. Let me show you what we have available. By the end of the week, I'd bought a beautiful colonial house in Riverside Heights, the same neighborhood where Amaya had always dreamed of living. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a library, and a garden that would be magnificent in the spring. The irony wasn't lost on me. Moving day was the following Saturday. I hired a service to transport my few belongings from the shelter. 2 garbage bags and a suitcase that looked pathetic in the grand foyer of my new home. But I also hired decorators to furnish the entire house, and by evening, it looked like something from a magazine. I was standing in my new kitchen, still marveling at the granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, when the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Derek's BMW in my driveway. I took my time answering the door, pausing to check my reflection in the hallway mirror. I was wearing new clothes, a cashmere sweater and wool slacks that probably cost more than Amaya's monthly grocery budget. My hair had been professionally styled that morning, and for the first time in months, I felt like I looked the way I deserved to look. Amaya stood on my front porch with Derek slightly behind her, both of them staring up at my house with expressions of barely concealed amazement. "Mom," Amaya said, her voice carefully controlled. "This is beautiful. Thank you. Please come in." I led them through the foyer into the living room, enjoying the way their eyes widened at the elegant furniture, the artwork, the obvious expense of everything they saw. "How much did this cost?" Derek asked, then caught himself. "I mean, it's lovely." $2.3 million, I said casually, settling into my new leather armchair. The decorator said I got a good deal. They sat on the sofa across from me, looking uncomfortable and out of place in my perfectly appointed living room. It was a reversal that felt deeply satisfying. "Mom," Amaya began, "I wanted to apologize again for how we handled things before. We were wrong to—" "You were wrong about everything," I interrupted. "Wrong about my worth, wrong about my potential, wrong about what I deserved." Amaya's face flushed, but she pressed on. "We know that now, and we want to make it right. How exactly do you plan to do that?" Derek leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We've been thinking, and we realized we should have been more supportive, more understanding." "More understanding of what, Derek?" "Of your situation, your circumstances." I almost laughed. My circumstances. As if being 63 and suddenly unemployed was some kind of character flaw rather than a reality millions of people faced. "My circumstances have changed," I said, dramatically. "We can see that," Amaya said, glancing around the room, "and we're so happy for you. Really." The silence stretched between us. I could see them both calculating, trying to figure out how to approach what they'd really come for. "Mom," Amaya said finally, "Derek and I have been having some financial difficulties lately." There it was, the real reason for their visit. "What kind of difficulties?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "The housing market has been tough. My commissions are down about 60% from last year. And we overextended ourselves a bit on the house," Amaya added. "The mortgage is becoming difficult to manage." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds stressful." "It is," Derek said quickly. "We're actually facing foreclosure if we can't catch up on the payments." "How much do you owe?" They exchanged a glance before Amaya answered. "About $80,000. Between the mortgage arrears and the credit cards. $80,000. 6 months ago, that would have seemed like an impossible sum. Now it was less than the interest I'd earned in the past week. "That is a lot of money," I said. "We were wondering," Derek continued, "given your recent success, if you might be able to help us out. As a loan, of course. We'd pay you back." I leaned back in my chair, studying them both. My daughter and her husband, sitting in my $1,000,000 living room, asking me to save them from the financial ruin they'd created for themselves. "A loan," I repeated. "With interest," Amaya said quickly. "Whatever rate you think is fair?" "And what collateral would you offer for this loan?" They looked confused. "Collateral? What would you put up to guarantee repayment? Banks don't make unsecured loans for that amount." Derek's face reddened. "We're family, Maxine. Surely we don't need to treat this like a business transaction." "Family." I let the word hang in the air. When I was sleeping in a homeless shelter, were we family then? Amaya's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please. We made mistakes, but we're trying to fix things. You're trying to fix your financial problems. There's a difference." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where snow still covered the dormant flower beds. In a few months, everything would be green and blooming. New life growing from what looked dead and worthless. "I'll make you a deal," I said, turning back to face them. Hope flickered in both their faces. "I'll pay off your mortgage and your credit cards. All of it." "Mom, thank you so much." I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. In exchange, you both write me a letter acknowledging exactly what you said to me the day you threw me out. Every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every moment you made me feel worthless and unwanted." The hope in their faces flickered uncertainly. "And then you explain in detail why you were wrong. Not just wrong about my potential for financial success, but wrong about my worth as a person and as your mother." Derek frowned. "I don't understand. What would be the point of that?" "The point, Derek, is that you both need to understand the damage you caused, the pain you inflicted, the cruelty you showed to someone who had spent her entire adult life putting you first." Amaya was crying now, real tears this time. "We know we hurt you, Mom. We're sorry. Sorry isn't enough. You need to understand why what you did was unforgivable." "Unforgivable?" Amaya's voice was barely a whisper. "You didn't just refuse to help me when I was desperate. You kicked me when I was down. You took pleasure in making me feel small and worthless." I sat back down, my voice steady and calm. You treated me like garbage, and when I ended up living like garbage, you felt justified in your cruelty. The truth of it hung in the room like smoke. Derek looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding my eyes. Amaya was staring at her hands, tears dripping onto her designer jeans. If you want my help, I continued, you'll write those letters. Detailed, honest letters acknowledging exactly what kind of people you revealed yourselves to be. And if we don't? Derek asked. I smiled, and it wasn't a warm expression. Then you lose your house and file for bankruptcy, and I'll live very comfortably in my beautiful home, knowing that I offered you the same compassion you showed me when I needed help. They left 20 minutes later, promising to think about my offer. I watched their car disappear down my street, then poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than they spent on groceries in a month. The house felt peaceful in the gathering dusk. My house, bought with money I'd earned for having the one thing they could never understand, genuine value that went deeper than appearances or social status. Outside, the first streetlights were coming on, casting long shadows across my perfectly manicured lawn. Tomorrow, I would continue the treatments that were slowly bringing Marcus Wellington back to consciousness. Every session brought me closer to the full $55 million, but more importantly, every session proved that I mattered, that I had always mattered, even when no one else could see it. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Dr. Martinez. Mrs. Thornfield, I have wonderful news. Marcus squeezed his father's hand today. The neurologist thinks he might wake up within the next few days. I closed my eyes, feeling a satisfaction that had nothing to do with money. That's wonderful. It is. And Mrs. Thornfield? Thank you. You're giving this family their son back. After I hung up, I sat in my beautiful living room, surrounded by luxury I'd never dreamed of, knowing that somewhere across town, a young man was fighting his way back to consciousness because of something I carried in my blood. Something precious and rare and valuable that had been there all along, waiting to be discovered by people who knew how to recognize worth when they saw it. Marcus Wellington opened his eyes on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 4 months after I'd started the treatment protocol. Dr. Martinez called me while I was having breakfast in my sunroom, watching the early spring flowers bloom in my garden. He's awake, Mrs. Thornfield, fully conscious and responsive. The neurologist says it's nothing short of miraculous. I set down my coffee cup, feeling tears I hadn't expected. How is he? Can he speak? He's weak, but his cognitive function appears to be completely intact. He recognized his parents immediately, knew where he was, remembered everything right up until the accident. A young man I'd never met was awake and alive because of something flowing through my veins. The magnitude of that never stopped amazing me. Mrs. Thornfield, Dr. Martinez continued, the Wellington family would like to meet you, if you're willing. They'd like to thank you personally. I agreed, and 2 days later, I found myself in Marcus Wellington's private hospital room. He was propped up in bed, still pale and thin from months of unconsciousness, but his eyes were clear and alert. His parents, Jonathan and Patricia Wellington, were exactly what I'd expected. Elegant, sophisticated people who wore their wealth like a comfortable old coat. But when they looked at me, there was no condescension, no judgment, only gratitude so profound it was almost embarrassing. Mrs. Thornfield, Patricia said, gripping my hands in both of hers. How do we even begin to thank you? You don't need to thank me, I said. I'm just glad I could help. Marcus himself was remarkably articulate for someone who'd been in a coma for 6 months. I understand you've been giving me your blood, he said with a weak smile. That's either the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me, or the most disturbing, depending on how you look at it. I laughed despite myself. I prefer to think of it as kind-hearted. Jonathan Wellington cleared his throat. Mrs. Thornfield, we owe you a debt that can never truly be repaid, but we'd like to try. The final payment, $50 million, was transferred to my account that afternoon. Along with the initial $5 million, I now had $55 million sitting in various investment accounts, earning more money every day than most people made in a year. But the money wasn't the most important thing that happened that week. The letters arrived on Friday. 2 envelopes slipped under my front door while I was at my weekly treatment session. When I found them that evening, my hands shook as I opened the first one. Derek's letter was stiff and formal, like a business memo. He acknowledged that he'd been unsupportive and perhaps overly harsh in his judgment of my situation. He apologized for any misunderstanding and hoped we could move forward as a family. It was exactly what I'd expected from him, the minimum effort required to get what he wanted, with no real understanding of the pain he'd caused. Amaya's letter was different. "Dear Mom," it began, and I could see tear stains on the paper. "I have started this letter 100 times, and each time I realize how inadequate words are for what I need to say. You asked me to write down exactly what I said to you, and so I will, even though it makes me sick to remember. I called you comfortable and mediocre. I said you had no ambition, no drive. I told you that you were bitter and that I didn't want you at Christmas because it would be awkward having you there unemployed. But the worst thing I said, the thing that keeps me awake at night, is when I told you that you didn't know how to take care of me, so I didn't want you near my baby. Mom, I was wrong about everything. Not just wrong about your ability to become wealthy, but wrong about who you are as a person. You worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. You sacrificed vacations, new clothes, and your own comfort to make sure I had everything I needed. When Dad left, you never once made me feel like it was my fault or like I was a burden. You just worked harder and loved me more. When I graduated from college, you were in the front row cheering. When I got married, you spent money you didn't have to help pay for my wedding. When Derek's business was struggling, you took money out of your retirement account to help us, and you never once made us feel guilty about it. You were never comfortable or mediocre. You were a single mother doing the best she could with limited resources. You were never bitter. You were tired from carrying burdens that should have been shared. I threw you out in the middle of winter not because you weren't contributing, but because I was ashamed of your circumstances. I was afraid my friends would judge me for having a mother who wasn't successful in the ways they respected. I was selfish and cruel, and I used tough love as an excuse for my own embarrassment. The truth is, I have never been half the woman you are. I have never sacrificed for anyone the way you sacrificed for me. I have never shown the strength and resilience you've shown your entire life. When you were sleeping in that shelter, I told myself you were learning a lesson, but I was the one who needed to learn. I needed to learn that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account or their job title. I needed to learn that family means standing by each other when times are hard, not just when times are good. I don't deserve your forgiveness and I don't expect it, but I needed you to know that I understand now what kind of daughter I've been. And I'm ashamed. You raised me to be better than this. Somehow I forgot everything you taught me about kindness and loyalty and love. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for all of it. Love, always. Amaya. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't perfect. There were still hints of self-pity, still traces of the entitlement that had always marked her character, but it was honest in a way I'd never seen from her before. The next week, I invited them both to lunch. Not at my house. I wasn't ready for that level of intimacy yet. Instead, I chose a quiet restaurant where we could talk without the weight of my wealth overshadowing every word. Amaya looked terrible. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Derek seemed subdued, lacking his usual swagger. "Thank you for coming," I said after we'd ordered. "Thank you for asking us," Amaya replied quietly. "I wasn't sure you would after what I wrote. Your letter was honest. That means something. We talked for 2 hours. Not about money or houses or forgiveness, but about Marcus Wellington and his recovery, about my new life and their struggles, about the small details of daily existence that families share when they're not trying to wound each other." At the end of lunch, I pulled out 2 envelopes. "These are cashier's checks," I told them. $100,000 each. Their eyes widened, but neither of them grabbed for the money. "It's not a loan," I continued, "and it's not payment for your letters. It's what I can afford to give without it affecting my own security and peace of mind." Derek started to speak, but I held up my hand. "It's enough to catch up your mortgage and pay off your credit cards, but not enough to solve all your problems. You'll still need to figure out how to live within your means. You'll still need to make changes. Amaya was crying again. Mom, we don't deserve this. No, I agreed. You probably don't. But I'm not giving it to you because you deserve it. I'm giving it to you because I can. And because watching you struggle doesn't make me happy the way I thought it would. That was 6 months ago. I still live in my beautiful house in Riverside Heights, but it no longer feels like a fortress built to keep the world out. I've furnished the guest rooms and started having visitors. Rosa from the shelter comes for dinner every Sunday, and we've become genuine friends. I've also started volunteering at the shelter, helping with their medical screening programs. It turns out there are other people like me, people whose blood contains rare antibodies that could save lives. We've identified 3 more potential donors in the past few months. Amaya and I have lunch once a month now. Our relationship will never be what it was, but it's becoming something new, more honest, more equal. She started working part-time as a substitute teacher, and Derek has taken a job with a more established real estate firm. They're slowly learning to live within their means. They've never asked for more money, and I've never offered it. Last week, Marcus Wellington called me. He's engaged again. The accident had postponed his wedding, but his fiancée waited for him through everything. They want to invite me to their ceremony in June. You gave me my life back, Mrs. Thornfield, he said. I'd like you to be there when I start the next chapter of it. Today is my 64th birthday. I'm sitting in my garden, which is now in full bloom, reading a book and enjoying the peace that comes from knowing exactly what I'm worth. Not the $55 million in my bank accounts, though that certainly doesn't hurt, but the deeper worth that was there all along. The worth of someone who spent her life caring for others, who sacrificed for her child even when that child couldn't see the value in the sacrifice. The worth of someone who survived rejection and homelessness and despair, and came through it stronger and more generous than before. My phone buzzes with a text message. It's from Amaya. Happy birthday, Mom. Thank you for teaching me that a person's value isn't measured by their circumstances, but by their character. I'm still learning, but I'm trying to be the daughter you deserved all along. I smile and put the phone aside. The afternoon sun is warm on my face and the garden is alive with the sound of bees and birds. Somewhere in the city, Marcus Wellington is planning his wedding and living the life my blood helped give back to him. Somewhere else, my daughter is learning to be a better person. And here in my garden, I am exactly where I belong. Not because of the money, though I'm grateful for the security it provides, but because I finally understand what I should have known all along. That I was never worthless, never mediocre, never bitter. I was just a woman whose value hadn't been recognized yet. Now it has been, and the peace that comes with that recognition is worth more than all the money in the world. The flowers in my garden sway gently in the afternoon breeze, and for the first time in 64 years, I am completely, perfectly content with exactly who I am. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.